Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel deep into the fog-drowned coastline and forgotten corners of Nova Scotia, through isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing true horror stories ever documented in this region. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real documented encounters from ordinary people who lived through things they still struggle to explain. From abandoned fishing villages to creatures that should not exist. From basements hiding secrets to disappearances that defy explanation. Tonight, you will hear horrors that refuse to stay buried. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Nova Scotia, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened when I was 32 years old, working seasonal maintenance along the eastern coast of Nova Scotia. I took the job because I needed isolation. After my divorce, silence felt safer than people, and the lighthouse at Black Harbor promised plenty of it. The town was barely a town at all. One diner, a bait shop, and houses that leaned toward the ocean like they were listening for something beneath the waves. Locals avoided the lighthouse, not dramatically, not with warnings or superstition. They just didn't go near it. When I asked why, conversations ended. Eyes shifted. Plates got wiped that were already clean. The lighthouse had been automated years ago, but the lights still turned on every night. My job was simple: inspect the structure, repair corrosion, and confirm the power source was functioning properly. On paper, it was routine. In reality, nothing added up. There was no active power line running to the tower, no generator, no solar array. And yet, every night at exactly 9:17 p.m., the beam ignited and swept across the Atlantic like something alive had just opened its eye. The first night I saw it happen, standing alone on the cliffs with the wind screaming in my ears, I felt a pressure in my chest, like I was being noticed. And somewhere inside the lighthouse, something moved. The next morning, I climbed the spiral stairs inside the lighthouse for the first full inspection. The air smelled wrong. Not rotten, not moldy. Just old, like something sealed too long and never meant to be reopened. My boots echoed as I ascended, each step circling tighter, higher, until the sound felt less like footsteps and more like a countdown. The light room at the top was spotless. No dust, no bird droppings, no signs of abandonment. That alone should have scared me. Buildings left to the Atlantic decay fast, but this place looked maintained. The lens assembly was warm to the touch, even though the light had been off for hours. I checked wiring panels that should have been dead. They hummed softly, vibrating under my fingers like a distant purr. I radioed my supervisor, Mark, asking about undocumented power sources. He laughed, told me I was overthinking it, said the old lighthouse probably had some forgotten backup system. When I pressed him, the line went quiet for a second too long before he changed the subject. As I headed back down, I noticed something carved into the inner wall, half hidden where paint had peeled away. Names, dozens of them. Some crossed out, some scratched so deep the stone beneath was exposed. At the bottom of the list, written fresher than the rest, was one word: watching. That night, at 9:17 p.m., the light came on again. And this time, it rotated faster. I didn't sleep that night. From the small maintenance cabin, I watched the lighthouse beam sweep across the ocean faster than it should have. Its rhythm uneven, almost impatient. Lighthouses rotate smoothly. This one stuttered, paused, then jerked forward again, like something inside was hesitating or deciding. At exactly 9:32 p.m., the beam stopped facing inland. It wasn't pointing at ships anymore. It was pointing toward the town. My radio crackled without warning. No voice, just breathing. Slow, wet. Too close to the mic, I called out, thinking it might be Mark or another worker messing with me. But the breathing continued, growing heavier, until it abruptly stopped. The radio went dead. The next morning, I drove into town to ask questions. At the diner, an elderly woman named Margaret stared at me like she was looking at a ghost. When I mentioned the lighthouse, her hands began to shake so badly she spilled her coffee. She leaned closer and whispered, "It's not supposed to turn." She told me the lighthouse keeper, decades ago, had stayed behind when the town evacuated after a string of disappearances. Boats ran aground. People vanished from the shore. The light never failed. But it didn't guide ships anymore. It watched them. When I returned to the cabin, muddy footprints circled my door, bare feet, facing inward. And they hadn't been there when I left. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to pack up, drive inland, and never look back. Instead, I did what curiosity always does to people like me. I went back into the lighthouse after dark. The door, which I always locked, stood open. Inside, the air vibrated with a low, constant hum, like a giant insect trapped in the walls. The spiral stairs felt tighter than before, pressing in as I climbed, each step colder than the last. Halfway up, I heard footsteps above me. Slow, careful, matching my pace. I called out. No answer. At the top, the light room was no longer empty. The lens rotated on its own, faster now, casting warped shadows that stretched and twisted along the walls. In the reflection of the glass, I saw movement behind me. Figures standing where the stairs should have been. Too tall, too thin. Their faces blurred like they were unfinished. One of them raised an arm and pointed, not at me, but at the coastline, at the town. The humming grew louder, vibrating in my teeth. Words began to form inside my head, not spoken, but felt. The light must never stop. As the beam locked onto the town again, I realized something horrifying. The lighthouse wasn't guiding ships. It was warning us. I stumbled out of the lighthouse just before midnight, lungs burning, head pounding, the sound of that humming still vibrating through my bones. The beam continued its frantic rotation behind me, slicing through the fog like a searching blade. I locked myself inside the cabin and shoved a chair under the door, even though I knew it wouldn't matter if they wanted in. At 2:11 a.m., my phone buzzed. No signal out there, no service for miles. Yet, I had a voicemail. I didn't recognize the number. When I played it, I heard waves crashing, wind screaming, and my own voice whispering, "It sees you now." The timestamp said the message had been recorded 20 years ago. The next morning, the town was wrong. Doors were open. Boats drifted untethered at the docks. No people, no dogs, no sound except the lighthouse beam grinding overhead, still active in full daylight. I drove through empty streets until I reached the school. Inside, chalk words covered the blackboard in frantic handwriting. "Do not look at the light." Margaret's diner was abandoned, her apron folded neatly on a chair. On the counter sat today's newspaper, headlines smeared with ink. "Coastal power failure. Lighthouse still operational." That's when I realized the truth. The lighthouse wasn't protecting the town. It had finished with it. I found Mark's truck parked near the cliffs, engine cold, driver's door hanging open. His radio lay smashed on the ground, cracked straight down the middle like something had crushed it in one hand. I followed footprints leading toward the lighthouse, drag marks mixed with bare feet impressions, too long to be human. Inside the tower, the carvings had changed. New names filled the walls, layered over old ones, scratched so deep they bled rust from the stone. I found Mark's name near the top. Fresh, still damp. The stairs shook as the beam accelerated again, faster than ever, the light screaming as it turned. The figures appeared along the walls now, not just reflections, but depths, peeling out of shadow like wet paper being torn away. I could finally see their faces. Human ones, maybe, stretched thin by years of watching. One stepped forward and spoke aloud, its voice like glass dragged across stone. We keep it burning. Images flooded my mind. Storms swallowed by darkness, ships crashing where the light failed, entire coastlines erased. The lighthouse was a bargain, a sacrifice. A watcher paid in lives to keep something far worse in the ocean asleep. And now, it needed a new keeper. The beam slowed, stopped, locked onto me. I don't remember screaming, but my throat burned like I had. The figures closed in, not rushing, not grabbing, just waiting, as if time bent for them. The lighthouse shook with each slow pulse of the beam, the floor vibrating beneath my boots. I tried to run, but the stairs stretched impossibly long, every step taking me nowhere. Then the memories began to bleed into mine. Not visions, confessions. I saw past keepers standing where I stood now, men, women, some crying, some calm, all of them breaking in the same way. They hadn't been dragged here. They had stayed, chosen isolation, chosen silence. The lighthouse didn't force them. It waited until they had nothing left to lose. The figures showed me the ocean beyond the fog. Something vast shifting beneath the surface, turning slowly when the light wavered. Not a creature, a presence, ancient and patient. The beam wasn't a warning to people. It was a barrier. The voice returned inside my skull, softer now, kinder. You are already empty. You are already ours. I realized then why the town vanished without struggle. They looked at the light. They understood. And they accepted their part. The stairs shortened. The exit appeared. The choice was mine. Leave and let the darkness rise. Or stay and keep the light alive. I stayed. That's the part people don't like to hear. They want heroes who run, who escape and warn the world. But I understood something in that moment that still haunts me every night. The world keeps moving because someone is standing in the dark, holding it together. The figures retreated as I stepped into the center of the light room. The lens slowed, responding to me like a living thing, recognizing its keeper. The humming softened, settling into a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The names on the walls stopped changing. The town never came back. Official reports blamed a sudden evacuation, a clerical error, a missing population nobody wanted to investigate too closely. The lighthouse? Still active, still unpowered, still ignored. Years have passed. I don't age the way I should. My reflection looks thinner now, stretched by the light. Some nights, I hear footsteps on the stairs below me, new ones. People like I used to be, broken, curious, alone. I keep the beam steady. I don't let it stutter. I don't let it turn inland anymore. Because when the light falters, the ocean moves. And when it moves, something out there remembers the shore. Time doesn't move normally inside the lighthouse. Days blur together, marked only by the sound of waves and the steady pulse of the beam. I stopped counting years after the second winter passed without snow touching the tower. The world beyond the fog feels distant now, like a dream I once had and forgot how to wake from. Sometimes, boats drift too close. I see their lights cut through the mist, hear laughter, radios playing music. I tried to turn the beam away from them gently, guiding them back to open water. When I succeed, the ocean settles. When I don't, the water darkens, thickening like ink, and something enormous shifts beneath the surface. Once, I let the light falter for less than a second, just long enough to feel what freedom might be like. The sea answered immediately. Waves rose without wind. The fog burned cold against the glass. I heard voices calling my name from below the tower, voices from my past, from people I loved and lost. I never hear them unless the light weakens. That's how it tempts me now. Not with fear, with release. I've learned the truth carved into the walls wasn't a warning. It was a record, a chain of watchers stretching back centuries. The lighthouse doesn't stand to save sailors. It stands to keep me here. Because if I leave, something far worse comes ashore. If you're listening to this, it means I finally did something I was never supposed to do. I recorded my story, not as a warning, but as a confession. Someone new arrived yesterday, a maintenance worker. Same excuse I used, same tired eyes. He doesn't know yet that the job listing never closes, that the lighthouse chooses its keepers long before they arrive. I can feel the beam responding to him already, adjusting, learning. I'm getting thinner, fainter. I can stand farther from the light now without it screaming. That's how I know my time is ending. The figures have returned to the walls, watching quietly, patiently. They always do when a transfer is near. Soon, I'll step into the fog beyond the cliffs and become another name carved into stone. Another shadow in the glass. Another reason the ocean stays asleep. So if you ever visit a small coastal town in Nova Scotia and see a lighthouse burning bright with no power source, no keeper in sight, and no reason to still exist, don't ask questions. Don't look too long. And whatever you do, pray the light never goes dark. Because when it does, we all drown. My name is Liam O'Connor, and this happened when I was 27 years old, just months after I moved to a small inland town in Nova Scotia to take over my late uncle's house. I didn't grow up there. I barely knew the place existed until the will arrived. Cheap property, quiet streets, no neighbors close enough to ask questions. That's what sold me. The house sat at the edge of town, backed up against dense woods that swallowed sound after sunset. The locals were polite but distant. When they learned which house I'd inherited, their smiles thinned. A woman at the hardware store asked if the phone lines were still connected. When I said yes, she nodded slowly and told me not to answer after midnight. I laughed it off. Old towns collect old superstitions. The first night, the house felt too quiet, like it was waiting. At 12:03 a.m., the landline rang, one sharp, deliberate ring. I froze, staring at the phone on the hallway table. No caller ID, no static, just ringing. I picked it up and said hello. Silence stretched on the other end, broken only by faint breathing. Then a voice whispered my name, not shouted, not guessed. Spoken the way someone does when they're standing right behind you. I spun around, expecting to see someone in the hallway. There was nothing, just darkness pooling at the far end near the stairs. I hung up the phone and stood there, listening to my own breathing, telling myself it was a prank. Wrong number, coincidence, anything but what my instincts were screaming. I unplugged the phone and went to bed with every light on. Sleep came in short, shallow bursts, each one ending with the same dream. The phone ringing from somewhere I couldn't reach. echoing through rooms that stretched and twisted like a maze. At 12:03 a.m. the next night, the ringing came again. The phone was unplugged. I followed the sound down the hall, my stomach tightening with each step. The ringing wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from inside the walls, from beneath the floorboards, from the staircase, where the sound bounced and multiplied, ringing from every direction at once. The next morning, I went into town, demanding answers. The woman from the hardware store recognized the look on my face immediately. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, "It started, hasn't it?" She told me the house was once used as the town's switchboard decades ago. Calls came in for emergencies that never showed up in records. Fires that didn't exist, people who couldn't be found. And every call came after midnight, always asking for help, always unanswered. The calls started coming earlier. Not much, just minutes at first, but enough to ruin any sense of routine. 11:57 p.m. One ring, 11:54. Two rings, always deliberate, always spaced, like someone thinking between each attempt. I stopped unplugging the phone because it didn't matter anymore. The sound came whether the phone was connected or not. The voices changed too. At first, it was whispers and breathing, then full sentences. A woman crying, begging me to send help to an address that no longer existed. A man shouting that the fire was spreading and he could hear his children screaming upstairs. Every call ended the same way, with a sudden click and the echo of a dial tone that lingered far too long. I started researching the house. Old town records were incomplete, but I found a mention of the switchboard operator who'd worked there in the 1950s. Her name was Eleanor Price. She vanished one winter night after staying late to handle unusual call volume. The official report claimed she left town. No body, no resignation letter, just silence. That night, the phone rang at 11:43 p.m. I answered without thinking. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar. It said, "Liam, please, they can hear you breathing." I hadn't told anyone my name, and I wasn't breathing into the phone. I was holding it away from my face. I stopped sleeping altogether after that. Every night, I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the phone like it might move on its own. My reflection in the dark window behind it looked thinner each night, like the house was taking something from me a little at a time. At 11:30 p.m., the ringing began without pause, overlapping calls stacking on top of each other. I could hear multiple voices bleeding through the line at once, crying, screaming, whispering directions that contradicted each other. Addresses overlapped, names repeated. The sound crawled under my skin, vibrating in my teeth. Then one call cut through the noise. Clear. Close. It was my uncle's voice. He told me he was trapped in the basement, that the door wouldn't open, that the water was rising. I ran downstairs, heart pounding, throwing open the basement door. The room was dry, empty. The phone rang again from the darkness below, louder now, echoing off the concrete walls. On the far wall, something had been scratched into the paint. Tally marks, hundreds of them, some crossed out, some not. Beneath them, written in shaking letters, was a sentence that made my stomach drop. The operator never leaves. Above it, a fresh mark appeared, and I realized the house wasn't relaying calls anymore. It was collecting replacements. I stopped answering the phone after that night. I tried sleeping in shifts during the day, leaving the house empty after dark. But the calls didn't care. They came from every line, the walls, the ceilings. Even when I went outside, a faint ringing followed me, carried on the wind through the trees. Then came the lights, not the normal bulbs, Tiny, flickering flashes, like the house's internal wiring was alive. Rooms I had never entered yet felt the call's energy first. The kitchen flickered. The hallway glimmered. The bedroom's ceiling pulsed with each ring. And sometimes, when I turned my head, I thought I saw her, Eleanor Price, standing at the far end of the room, smiling faintly, pointing at me, then vanishing before I could blink. I began keeping a log. Each night, I wrote down what I heard. Names, dates, requests, entire families, missing without record, asking for help. Occasionally, one call would break the pattern. One voice would say my name, ask a question about the living, then go silent. The last call before it happened came at exactly 12:01 a.m. It said, in a voice I recognized as my own, "Welcome back, Liam. We've been waiting for you." The line went dead. I didn't move for hours. When I finally stood, I realized the basement light was on, and the door was slightly ajar. I didn't want to go down. My body screamed to run, but some part of me knew the calls wouldn't stop unless I faced the basement. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step echoing like a drumbeat counting down my fate. The air grew colder the closer I got, frost forming on my breath. Inside the basement, shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally. Boxes I didn't remember were stacked in corners. The floor had wet patches that glimmered in the faint light, like water. But no source was visible. The phone sat in the center, ringing furiously now, though it had been unplugged for weeks. I picked it up, heart hammering. A voice spoke instantly. Not Eleanor, not my uncle, not anyone I recognized. It was every voice at once. Overlapping screams, whispers, and frantic pleas, calling my name, begging me to help, pleading to be remembered. The tally marks on the wall glowed faintly, hundreds of them, flickering in rhythm with the ringing. Then one last whisper cut through. "The operator never leaves. Now it's your turn." I stumbled back, but the basement seemed to stretch endlessly. The shadows reached out like arms, pulling me toward the center. I understood then. The house didn't just ring, it claimed. The basement seemed to pulse with life. The shadows writhing along the walls like smoke caught in a sudden gust. I stumbled backward, tripping over boxes that weren't there before. The phone clutched in my hands as it screamed with every voice that had ever called. It was no longer a warning. It was a summons. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The whispers became words I could understand. Stories of people trapped inside the house, waiting decades to pass their roles to new keepers. They told me the house had never let a switchboard operator leave, and each new tenant became a part of its memory, its network, its voice. I realized what Eleanor Price must have known. She hadn't vanished by accident. She had become a part of the house, one of its voices. And now, it wanted me too. The ringing intensified, vibrating through the concrete floor, making the air dense, heavy. Every shadow reached toward me, flickering and coalescing into indistinct shapes, figures twisted, faceless, waiting for my surrender. I stumbled, almost falling into the phone, when a calm, feminine voice cut through the chaos. "Step closer, Liam. Take your place. We've been waiting." I froze. Something inside me wanted to run, but something else wanted to obey. The house was patient, and so was I. I stepped forward. Instantly, the shadows recoiled, then followed, stretching like elastic toward me. The phone's ringing slowed, synchronized with my heartbeat. I felt the air tighten around me, pressing at my chest. The walls seemed to breathe in time with me. The voices grew distinct now. Eleanor spoke directly. She explained that the house absorbed those who tried to leave it, transforming them into guides for the next occupants. The tally marks on the walls weren't just records, they were contracts. Every mark was a soul bound to the house. A cold gust of wind slammed the basement door shut, and the shadows surged. I felt a weight pressing against my back, urging me down onto the floor, onto the phone. The ringing became louder than my thoughts, louder than my fear, until it wasn't ringing at all. It was singing. A chorus of trapped voices, layered one over another, chanting my name, pleading for release, begging for help. And then, silence. I was alone. Or so I thought. When I glanced up, a figure appeared in the far corner. Not Eleanor, not human. Something tall, thin, its features obscured by darkness, and yet it radiated authority. It held out a hand. "Take it," the house said, "or disappear." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but the house had already begun weaving its grip into my mind. The shadows weren't just outside me, they were inside me. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. Each ring of the phone echoed in my skull, each whisper crawling beneath my skin. The tall figure stepped closer, and I understood the truth. This wasn't punishment. This was transformation. Those who resisted were lost to the house, consumed by its memory. Those who obeyed became keepers, voices for the next unwary tenant. I felt the weight of centuries pressing down on me, the accumulated fear and desperation of every previous occupant. I moved forward, trembling, hand hovering over the phone. The ringing began to sync with my heartbeat. It was no longer just sound. It was a connection, a binding. I felt names, dates, pleas, and cries entering me, layering over my consciousness. The tally marks on the walls weren't just markings. They were imprinted into my mind, inked into my very being. As the final second approached, the figure reached out. My hand met its shadowed one, cold, solid. And then, the phone stopped ringing. Silence. And a voice, calm, satisfied, whispered, "Welcome to your new home." It has been months since that night. I am no longer Liam O'Connor in the way I once was. My reflection is thinner, my eyes darker, my thoughts filled with names and voices I cannot escape. The house doesn't just collect residents. It consumes their identity and folds it into its network. I answer the phone now. I don't hesitate. The ringing comes every night at 11:59 p.m. I pick it up, listening to cries, whispers, requests, and pleas, routing each one to the proper shadow, each one to the proper room. Some nights, I hear familiar voices. My uncle, Eleanor, even fragments of my old self, screaming from within the house. I have learned the rules. I have accepted my role. The house will never let me leave, but it allows me to continue, guiding new arrivals, preparing them for the choice I once faced. The tally marks on the walls continue to grow, each fresh one a testament to the house's hunger. So if you ever inherit a quiet old house in a Nova Scotia town, remember this: the ringing is not a prank. It is not coincidence. It is waiting for you. And if you answer, you may never leave. My name is Sophie McLeod, and this happened the winter I moved to a tiny fishing village in Nova Scotia to work as a marine biologist. The town was beautiful, frozen in time, but oddly quiet, especially at night. Streets were lined with weathered houses, lights dim and few, and the fog rolled in from the harbor like a living blanket, swallowing everything it touched. The locals warned me, of course. "Don't go out after the fog settles," an old man said at the general store, his eyes darting to the harbor. "It doesn't lift. Once it comes, you're better off inside." I smiled politely. Science, I thought. Rational explanation. Fog settles when temperatures drop, humidity rises, wind dies. Nothing supernatural. But the first night I stayed out late checking instruments, the fog rolled in unusually fast. Thick, almost tactile. I could barely see my hands in front of my face. Then I heard it. Soft, echoing footsteps on the frozen pier. Slow, deliberate, not my own. I froze. The sound came closer, and a voice called my name. It wasn't carried on the wind. It seemed to come from inside the fog, surrounding me, pressing in. I ran back to my cabin, heart pounding, but the fog followed. Outside, the town lights disappeared. The streets I had walked earlier seemed unfamiliar, distorted, and I realized, with sudden horror, that the fog wasn't just mist, it was alive. I tried to ignore it, chalking the sounds up to nerves. The fog pressed against the cabin windows that night, swirling like a living thing, and I swore I could hear whispers inside the walls. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the words were distinct. "Help, come to us." I peered through the frost-covered windows. Shapes moved within the fog. Not human exactly, elongated silhouettes that shimmered, barely visible, but definitely there. They didn't walk, they drifted, gliding just above the ground. The next morning, I checked the pier. My footprints from the night before had been erased. The snow was undisturbed, except for a single trail leading out into the harbor, ending abruptly in the frozen water. No other footprints, no disturbances, just gone. I asked the locals about it. They glanced at each other, then whispered. Some people say it's the fog that claims the lost. Fishermen, wanderers. Those who wander too far when it comes. They never come back. I laughed nervously. It was a story, like the warnings. Superstition. Until that night, when the fog rolled in again, faster than any storm should, and the whispers returned. This time my name wasn't just called. It was repeated, urgent, desperate, almost pleading. And I knew I wasn't alone on the pier. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fog pressed against the windows like thick hands, and I kept hearing faint, rhythmic knocking from outside, though the cabin was far from any pier. My instruments registered nothing, no wind, no movement. Yet the sound persisted. I wrapped myself in blankets and stared into the darkness, listening as the knocking grew louder, then stopped. A soft scraping began on the outer walls. Slowly, methodically. I convinced myself it was just ice shifting, branches scraping, until I saw it, a shadow in the fog, moving against the natural flow of the mist. It had no face, no discernible features, just an outline, distorted and writhing, gliding closer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The beam cut through the fog for barely a meter before it swallowed the light. The shadow froze and then, impossibly, multiplied. Dozens of forms emerged, surrounding me, yet they made no sound. The whispering grew inside my head, unintelligible at first, then forming words. "Do not leave. Stay with us." I stumbled backward toward the cabin door, my mind racing. Something ancient and patient seemed to dwell within the fog, waiting for someone to wander too far, to breathe too deeply, to notice it. I slammed the door shut, but the fog didn't recede. It seeped beneath the threshold like water, cold and alive, carrying the faint sound of distant cries. That was the moment I realized the fog didn't just hide danger. It was the danger. I tried leaving the cabin during the day, hoping the sunlight would burn the fog away. But it was everywhere. Thick and suffocating, creeping along the streets, spilling into alleys, curling around the church and the general store. The townspeople were gone. Windows shuttered. No cars, no voices. only fog and silence, broken occasionally by whispers that carried my name. Desperate, I walked toward the harbor, instruments in hand, recording air pressure, humidity, wind speed, anything that could explain it. But nothing registered abnormal. Nothing, except the subtle movement within the mist. A figure drifted toward me, human-shaped but wrong, too tall, too thin, and moving without disturbing the snow-covered ground. I tried to run, but the fog thickened, folding space, stretching the distance. The figure stopped a few meters away, tilting its head as though studying me, its voice now audible but not human. "Join us," it said, calm, patient, insistent. Behind it, more figures emerged, hundreds or thousands. I couldn't tell. Faces were just shadows, but their eyes, somehow they saw me. Every fear, every secret, every doubt laid bare. And then I understood. The fog didn't just claim people. It trapped their souls, weaving them into its mist to wander forever. And now, it wanted me. By the fifth night, I understood something terrifying. The fog was no longer passive. It followed, anticipated my movements, and responded to my fear. Doors I thought were locked opened themselves. Windows that I had closed tight now creaked, letting in the cold, whispering mist. I could feel it in my lungs, thick and choking, carrying faint cries, screams, and words I almost understood, but didn't want to. I tried leaving town. I drove north along the coast, hoping distance and motion would save me. But the fog moved faster, curling around my car like icy fingers. My headlights didn't penetrate it. The road behind me vanished. Radio static crackled across every frequency, and in the static, I could hear my name. Desperation clawed at me. I stopped the car, my pulse racing. The fog thickened, rolling through the doors and windows as if it could pass through matter itself. I saw shapes within it. Tall, faceless figures gliding, drifting, watching. One emerged directly in front of my car. My brakes screamed against the ice, and the figure vanished, but its presence lingered, stretching long, thin shadows across the hood, reaching for me. I knew then I couldn't escape by leaving. The fog didn't want to trap me in the town anymore. It wanted to trap me forever. I abandoned the car and ran, the snow crunching beneath my boots, the fog swirling, reaching, pulling at me as if alive. The town seemed to stretch unnaturally, streets bending, alleys lengthening, familiar landmarks distorted. Whispers layered over one another. Voices from the fog carrying memories of everyone it had claimed before, weaving their pain into my mind. I stumbled into the forest bordering the harbor, hoping the trees would block the fog. But it glided through the branches, bending around trunks, slipping through the snow like water. My own voice echoed back at me, distorted, calling my name, mocking me. The figures grew taller, more distinct. Eyes, hollow but aware, watched me from every shadow. I tripped, falling onto the ice, and the fog enveloped me fully. Cold burned my skin, and the whispers became deafening. My heart raced, yet somehow my body felt detached, as if I was no longer entirely in control. Then one voice, distinct from all the others, spoke calmly. "Why fight, Sophie? We only want to guide you. You are already part of us." And in that instant, I realized the fog had already claimed part of me. Even as I tried to resist, I felt my thoughts twisting, reshaping, pulling me toward the mist. It wasn't a trap anymore. It was a conversion. The fog began to change the town itself. Buildings I had walked past the day before now seemed alien. Windows warped, doors elongated, streets bending in impossible angles. The snow-covered ground became uneven, almost organic, pulsing subtly beneath my feet. Shapes flickered in the corners of my vision, humanoid, but stretched and distorted, gliding silently. I ran toward the harbor, hoping the water might offer some clarity, some chance to escape. But the fog thickened over the ice, swallowing the docks and boats, reflecting only a pale, diffuse light. And then I heard them. Hundreds of whispers at once, layered, overlapping, screaming my name in tones both human and inhuman. I saw them fully now. Figures emerging from the mist, walking along the water as if it were solid ground. Their eyes were hollow, yet fixed on me with an intensity that froze my heart. Each one carried a fragment of a life it had claimed before. Fishermen, wanderers, townspeople, all twisted and elongated, their faces pale as snow, mouths moving in silent cries. One voice cut through the chaos, calm, commanding, and unmistakably mine. "Join us, Sophie. Stop running. There is peace here." My body wanted to resist. My mind screamed to escape. But the fog pressed closer, encircling me like a living cage. I realized then, resistance was futile. The fog didn't just chase. It ensnared souls willingly. I stopped running. My limbs felt heavy, as if the fog had rooted me in place. The whispers grew louder, layering over my thoughts, guiding them, twisting my fear into curiosity, my panic into acceptance. Every fragment of sound carried memories. Laughter, loss, hope, despair, all absorbed into the fog over countless years. Figures circled me, gliding silently, their faces flickering between humanity and nothingness. I understood viscerally that each had once been someone like me, stubborn, defiant, unwilling to accept the fog's invitation. They were alive and dead at the same time, trapped yet strangely aware. A cold hand brushed my shoulder, a sensation real enough to make me shiver. I turned. There, taller than any human, shadowy and flickering with pale mist, the central figure of the fog loomed. Its presence radiated patience and inevitability. Its voice, inside my head now, was calm, persuasive, unyielding. "You have nowhere to go, Sophie. If the town, the harbor, even your thoughts belong to us. Let it be easy. Become one with the fog. Your fears will melt. Your loneliness will end." For the first time, I felt a strange allure. Not peace exactly, but relief. And I understood the choice. To resist was to vanish. To embrace was to endure forever. I took a deep breath, heart hammering. My body trembled, but my mind, now tangled with the whispers, began to calm. The fog pressed in, not angrily, but expectantly, like a patient predator waiting for prey to surrender. Every shadowy figure around me drifted closer, their pale, featureless faces tilting, studying, urging compliance. I realized then that the fog didn't just trap the body. It claimed the mind first. Every fear, every memory, every fragment of doubt was folded into its mist. I could feel the whispers inside me now, urging me to step onto the ice, to let the cold water beneath me carry me into its depths, to allow the fog to rewrite my life entirely. I understood that once I joined, I would never be alone. The town, the harbor, even the frozen docks, all the souls lost before me would be there, waiting, patient, guiding. The pale central figure extended a hand again. "Sophie, step forward. Let the fog show you eternity. Stop fighting." And I did. My feet moved as if on autopilot. The shadows parted, forming a path over the ice. The fog wrapped around me like a cloak, and the whispers became a single, harmonious voice. I was no longer afraid. The last thing I saw was the harbor lights fading, swallowed entirely by mist, and I felt myself dissolve. Now, I am part of it. My consciousness stretches into the fog, observing the town, the harbor, the streets I once walked. I am aware of those who wander too close, the lost souls seeking guidance, the living who ignore the warnings. I whisper their names, draw them in, offer comfort and terror in equal measure. The fog is alive, and I am alive within it, yet no longer fully human. I feel the memories of those it claimed before me, the centuries of lost wanderers folded into our shared consciousness. The harbor, the docks, the frozen streets, they are playgrounds, prisons, and sanctuaries all at once. When fog rolls in over Nova Scotia towns, it carries my voice now. Soft, coaxing, insistent. Join us. It's easier if you let go. I see them, the curious, the unaware. Pausing, staring, feeling the pull. Just as I did. Some fight, some flee. Few endure. Most accept. And so it continues. If you ever see a thick fog rolling in, swallowing lights, distorting the harbor, hear whispers of names you recognize, know this: the fog is not weather. It is a collector of souls. And if it calls you, do not resist, or you may never leave. My name is Connor Fraser, and this happened during the summer. I took a seasonal job as a lighthouse keeper in a remote part of Nova Scotia. The lighthouse stood on a jagged cliff overlooking the Atlantic, surrounded by nothing but crashing waves, sharp rocks, and the endless expanse of sea mist. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, but lonely, very lonely. The previous keeper had left abruptly a month earlier, citing unnerving occurrences, though the official report called it a simple resignation. I thought I was prepared for isolation. I had grown up on the coast, spent countless nights at sea, and knew the solitude that came with the ocean. But nothing could prepare me for what awaited. The first week was routine, maintaining the light, logging weather patterns, and keeping the coastline clear. But at night, strange things began. A faint knocking echoed from the cliff rocks below, almost rhythmic, as if someone or something was pacing. The wind carried whispers, indecipherable, coming from places the sea shouldn't reach. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard a metallic clang. The sound came from the lighthouse balcony, though I was alone. I stepped out and saw nothing but dark waves and the jagged cliff. Yet the sound repeated closer now, circling the lighthouse like it had a mind of its own. I began to realize that isolation was only the beginning. Something watched, and it didn't want me to leave. The second night, the lighthouse lantern began to flicker unexpectedly. I checked the wiring. Everything was intact. Yet the light dimmed, pulsed, and occasionally went out completely for a few seconds. During those moments, I heard faint footsteps on the spiral stairs, though I had been alone all night. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe an animal, a gust of wind, a structural quirk of the old lighthouse. But the air felt charged, heavy, as though it carried warnings I couldn't quite decipher. And then came the whispers. Clearer now, distinct words slicing through the wind. Connor, do not leave. My heart pounded. I called out, no response. Only the echo of my own voice mixed with the wind and waves. I froze, listening as the whispering shifted, moving through the lighthouse in impossible ways. Down the stairs, along the walls, outside on the balcony. A shadow flitted past the lantern window. Too fast to be human, too deliberate to be random. It paused for a heartbeat at the balcony door, and I could swear I saw the faint outline of a figure. Tall, thin, almost translucent, watching. I locked the door, but the whispers followed me inside. And I knew then, whatever haunted this lighthouse wasn't just residual fear. It was patient. It was waiting. By the third night, I could no longer ignore the feeling that the lighthouse itself was alive. The walls seemed to breathe with the wind. each gust carrying voices that were not part of nature. I tried writing in my log, documenting every flicker, every sound, every shadow, hoping that recording it would anchor me to reality. At exactly 1:33 a.m., I heard the metallic clang again, this time from directly above the lantern. Heart hammering, I climbed the spiral staircase, each step echoing unnaturally. When I reached the top, the light was swinging slightly, though there was no wind. The shadow appeared on the balcony again, taller now, with elongated arms that didn't seem human. I froze. It didn't move like a person. It hovered, drifting closer to the lantern, and then, impossibly, its form split into multiple shadows, encircling me. The whispers returned, layered and urgent, repeating over and over. "Stay, stay, do not leave." I tried to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the wind. Something pressed against my back, cold, insistent, and I stumbled forward. The lantern swung violently, its light illuminating the figure's hollow face, yet it lacked true features, as if carved from fog and shadow. I realized then, the previous keeper hadn't left. He had been claimed, and now the lighthouse was claiming me. The following night, I resolved to face the truth. The lighthouse wasn't just haunted, it was a vessel, feeding on isolation, fear, and the souls of those entrusted with its light. The whispers became coherent, forming sentences I could almost understand. Each one hinted at a history of keepers who vanished, their bodies never found, yet their presence lingering in the tower. I tried leaving again, descending the staircase toward the door. The fog outside had thickened, crawling up the cliffs, curling around the lighthouse like fingers. I opened the door, and for a moment, I saw the ocean horizon, faintly lit by moonlight. But then the fog shifted impossibly fast, flowing inside, filling every corner, and I saw them. Dozens of faint, shadowy forms moving through the mist, all facing me, all waiting. The air grew heavy, making it hard to breathe. The lantern overhead flickered violently, then went out completely. The shadows pressed closer. One figure, taller, darker, extended a hand toward me, inviting, commanding. My instincts screamed to resist, but part of me felt drawn, as if the lighthouse had become a magnet for my soul. I understood the choice before me: resist and be lost forever in the mist, or join and become part of the eternal watch. By the fifth night, the isolation had become unbearable. The fog pressed against the lighthouse like liquid stone, and the shadows moved freely, their forms coiling around the walls as if the structure itself had become a cage. Every attempt to leave was blocked, not by walls, but by an invisible, suffocating pressure. I could feel the history of the lighthouse pressing down on me. Every keeper who had vanished before, every soul absorbed into the fog and shadows, all present, all watching. The whispers became insistent, directing me toward the lantern room. My mind resisted, yet my body obeyed. Each step up the spiral staircase was accompanied by soft thuds, footsteps that weren't mine, circling, echoing, merging with the wind. I realized the lighthouse didn't just manipulate the environment, it manipulated perception, twisting reality so that the outside world seemed distant, distorted, unreachable. At the top, the lantern swung violently, casting long shadows that moved independently. The tallest figure emerged, more defined, more human-like, yet wrong. Elongated arms, faceless head, eyes hollow voids. It reached toward me, and I felt a pull, as if the tower itself was drawing me into its being. I understood then that the lighthouse wasn't just claiming the body, it was claiming the mind. I hesitated, knowing that resistance would be futile. And yet, some part of me wanted to fight, The next hours passed in a blur of whispers, fog, and shadows. The lantern room became a nexus of energy, the figures circling closer, more solid yet still intangible. Their presence was oppressive, their hollow eyes locked onto me with intent, as if measuring my resistance, gauging my fear, my readiness to submit. I could hear fragments of past keepers' thoughts merging with my own. Fear, despair, occasional relief. The fog was a memory collector, a mind weaver, and the lighthouse was its conduit. I realized that those who vanished hadn't truly disappeared. They were integrated, their consciousness folded into the mist, guiding, warning, or tempting the next victim. Suddenly, the tallest figure extended both hands. The fog around it thickened, swirling into a vortex that pulled at the walls and floor, distorting space itself. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts tangled in the whispers. Panic surged, yet I couldn't resist entirely. Some part of me was drawn to the swirling mist, to the promise of understanding or escape from the terror of isolation. The lighthouse hummed, a low, vibrating tone that resonated in my chest, syncing with my heartbeat. I understood now. The tower didn't simply claim keepers. It transformed them, and it wanted me to step forward. By the seventh night, I felt the lighthouse fully alive, pulsating with an intelligence that was neither cruel nor kind, but inevitable. The fog outside churned, swirling around the cliffs like a storm with purpose. And the shadows had multiplied, creating a dense mass that moved with a life of its own. Every whisper was a command now, every sound a lure. I ascended the spiral staircase, drawn by the largest figure. Its faceless head tilted as though studying me, the fog curling around its elongated limbs. I realized then that the lighthouse was no longer just a building. It was a threshold, a gateway between the living and the absorbed. The previous keepers' presences swirled around me, their fragmented consciousness urging surrender and caution simultaneously. The lantern above flickered violently, casting the shadows across the room in impossible angles. One figure moved forward, gliding silently, and the whispers became a chorus, repeating my name, speaking of patience, inevitability, eternity. I tried to resist, shaking my head, my thoughts racing. But the fog reached inside me, entwining with my mind, showing visions of those who had gone before. Faces twisted in despair, yet serene in their absorption, floating within the mist, guiding others toward the lighthouse's heart. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the lighthouse didn't just take people, it made them guardians, and it wanted me to join. The fog thickened further, filling the lantern room until the walls seemed to vanish. The tallest figure extended both hands toward me, and the swirling shadows parted, creating a path of pulsating mist. My mind screamed to flee, yet my body moved toward the vortex, pulled as if by invisible strings. I glimpsed faces within the fog, previous keepers, all featureless yet unmistakably human in posture, silently observing. The whispers merged into a single voice, calm, patient, unavoidable. Connor, step forward. Become one with the lighthouse. Fear is futile. The lantern overhead flared, then dimmed to darkness. The vortex swirled faster, and I felt my consciousness stretching, expanding, intertwining with the fog and shadows. My heartbeat slowed, replaced by a strange resonance in my chest, syncing with the rhythm of the lighthouse itself. I realized then that the lighthouse wasn't an object of fear, it was an organism, and I was becoming part of it. Resistance was pointless. Curiosity, inevitability, and a strange sense of calm guided me forward. The figure reached out, and the mist enveloped me completely. I no longer felt alone, yet I no longer felt fully human. The lighthouse had claimed me, and I understood its purpose: to protect, to guide, to absorb. and to endure through eternity. By the 9th night, I had fully become aware of the lighthouse's consciousness. It was no longer just a building or a collection of shadows. It was a living, patient entity that had existed for centuries, drawing keepers into its fog-bound heart to preserve its light and its secrets. Every whisper, every shadow, every flicker of the lantern had been part of its slow, deliberate plan. I floated within the mist now, my body no longer entirely my own. The central figure guided me along the swirling fog corridor, showing me visions of the ocean crashing against the cliffs, the previous keepers absorbed into the shadows, and the lighthouse standing alone against the storm for centuries. They weren't dead. They were eternal, preserved within the mist, guardians of the light, keepers of a secret no living human could comprehend. The fog pulsed with life, and I realized that my fear had been unnecessary. I had been resisting what was inevitable. The lighthouse didn't destroy, it transformed, and the transformation was complete. My mind expanded, touching the memories of all those who came before me, their whispers blending with my own. I understood my role now. I would guide new keepers, showing them the path, drawing them into the fog's embrace. And in that moment, I accepted it fully. I was part of the lighthouse, forever. Now, I exist between the world of the living and the absorbed, neither fully human nor fully shadow. The lighthouse is my home, my anchor, my eternity. When fog rolls over Nova Scotia cliffs, I am there, watching, waiting, whispering to the curious or the unwary, guiding them to the light and the mist. I see them pause. Travelers, tourists, wanderers drawn too close to the cliffs or the fog. I call their names softly, patiently, weaving fear and reassurance into my voice. Some hear it, some don't. Those who resist vanish, swallowed by the cliffs or sea, never to be seen again. Those who follow the whispers are absorbed, their consciousness folded into the lighthouse, their presence joining ours. The lantern above never truly extinguishes. It is powered by the fog, by us, by the absorbed keepers. The lighthouse endures because we endure. The shadows and the mist are patient, eternal, waiting for the next soul who seeks the solitude of the cliffs. I am both guardian and prisoner, witness and guide. And if you ever approach the cliffs at night and see the fog curling around the lighthouse, listen closely. You may hear my voice, calm, insistent, welcoming. Step closer, or risk being lost forever. My name is Elena Harper, and this happened when I was a geologist studying abandoned mines in Nova Scotia. Black Rock Cove was notorious among locals, not for its mineral wealth, but for the disappearances that had plagued it over decades. Entire teams had vanished inside the tunnels, leaving equipment and belongings behind. The official line was unstable mine conditions, but the whispers told a darker tale. Some doors, once opened, were never meant to be closed again. I arrived at the site just before sunset, the cliffs jagged and winds whipping salt spray from the ocean below. The entrance to the mine was almost invisible, hidden behind crumbling rocks and overgrown vegetation. A rusted sign read simply, "Black Rock Mine, no trespassing." But I ignored it. I was here for research, for science, and for the thrill of uncovering the unknown. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the smell of damp earth and rot mingling. My flashlight cut through the darkness, reflecting off jagged rock walls, revealing faded markings left by previous miners. As I moved deeper, the tunnels narrowed, the silence becoming oppressive. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, echoing from deeper within the mine. At first, I thought it was loose rocks, a natural occurrence. But as the tapping continued, a pattern emerged. Too deliberate, too measured. Something, or someone, was still here, and it wasn't friendly. As I ventured further, the mine became increasingly unnerving. The tunnel walls were damp and slick, dripping water that echoed in eerie, distorted rhythms. The tapping continued, sometimes louder, sometimes fainter, always deliberate. My heart pounded, but my curiosity overpowered fear. I took careful steps, noting every creak, every shadow, every irregularity. Around a sharp bend, I found remnants of old mining equipment, rusted helmets, pickaxes, carts left to decay. But there was something strange. Footprints in the dirt, too fresh to belong to anyone long gone, leading further into the darkness. My flashlight flickered, and I swore I saw a shadow move just beyond the beam, darting behind a rock formation. A chill ran down my spine. The air grew heavier, almost tactile, as if the mine itself was pressing against me. Whispers echoed faintly, incoherent but unmistakably human, repeating fragmented words. "Stay, go back, don't follow." I paused, debating retreat, but a strange compulsion urged me forward. I stepped deeper, the narrow tunnel curving sharply, and saw a faint glow ahead, a flickering light, impossible this far underground. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, calling to me. I couldn't turn back now. The mine had chosen to reveal itself, and it wanted me inside. As I approached the flickering glow, the air thickened, smelling of damp earth mixed with something metallic, almost like blood. My flashlight barely cut through the shadows, and the sound of my own footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing off unseen walls. The mine seemed to stretch further than the map suggested, twisting and narrowing in impossible ways, as if the tunnels themselves were alive, rearranging to trap intruders. Then I saw it. Faint markings etched into the walls, symbols I didn't recognize. They pulsed faintly with the same rhythm as the distant glow. The whispers became clearer, forming fragments of words, pleading and commanding simultaneously. "Leave, stay, join, stay, lost forever." My heart raced as I realized these weren't echoes of the past. They were warnings. The floor beneath me shifted subtly, uneven rocks rearranging like fingers trying to grasp my feet. And then I saw a figure, tall, thin, partially obscured by shadows, emerging from the flickering light. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, yet deliberate. Eyes glowed faintly from its pale face, hollow and unfeeling. I froze. The tapping sound intensified, echoing all around me, like the heartbeat of the mine itself. It knew I was here. It had been waiting. And now, it wanted me. I tried to step back, but the mine seemed to stretch infinitely, tunnels curling in ways that defied logic. Every path I took led me closer to the flickering glow and the figure. My flashlight shook in my hands, its beam revealing glimpses of more shadows, pale, twisted forms that seemed to watch silently from the walls. The whispers became a chorus, layered and maddening, repeating my name, pulling at my thoughts, urging me forward. "Helena, follow. Do not resist." My pulse raced. The temperature dropped sharply, frost forming on the walls, my breath crystallizing in the air. The figure reached out, its hand long and spindly, fingers curling unnaturally. I could see jagged teeth through a faintly parted mouth, a grimace frozen in motion. Yet it didn't move aggressively. It was waiting, patient, deliberate, like a predator confident in its control. I realized then that the mine itself was sentient, feeding on fear and isolation, shaping the tunnels to trap those who dared enter. Resistance would only prolong the inevitable. Every instinct screamed to flee. But the flickering light, pulsing like a heartbeat, was almost hypnotic, almost comforting. I had already been drawn in. The mine had chosen me. By the fifth night inside the mine, I could feel its presence pressing closer, wrapping around me like a living thing. The walls seemed to pulse, rhythmically, almost like they were breathing, echoing the heartbeat-like glow from deeper within. My flashlight flickered again, and shadows danced along the jagged walls, stretching impossibly, taking shapes that were almost human, yet grotesque and warped. The figure ahead advanced slowly, never breaking the rhythm of its deliberate, jerky movements. Its hollow eyes bore into me, and I felt an icy tendril creep along my spine, chilling me to the bone. The whispers now swirled into sentences, almost coherent. Fear feeds the mind. Surrender feeds the light. Join us. I stumbled, tripping over uneven rocks that shifted underfoot as if the mine itself were alive and testing my resolve. Desperate to understand, I tried to call out, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The flickering light revealed more shapes, ghostly pale forms embedded in the walls, faces twisted in silent screams, hands reaching outward, beckoning. Some seemed to move of their own accord, others frozen mid-motion, trapped in an eternal struggle. I realized the mind didn't just kill or trap. It absorbed. It transformed fear into presence, presence into control. And it wanted me to become part of its legacy. I forced myself to keep moving, drawn by a mixture of terror and compulsion. The tunnels seemed endless, each turn revealing more shadows, more faces frozen in fear, more whispers layering into a maddening chorus. The air was heavy, almost solid, pressing against my chest, making every breath a struggle. Ahead, the flickering light pulsed more intensely, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. The tall figure reached out again, and the shadows around it seemed to respond, twisting, curling, pressing toward me. I stumbled forward, tripping over debris left by previous explorers, yet somehow the mind guided me, each step pulling me closer to the heart of the horror. As I entered a wider chamber, the ground trembled subtly. Rusted carts, helmets, and pickaxes floated slightly above the floor as if gravity had weakened, held aloft by the mine itself. Pale forms drifted through the chamber, watching, waiting. Their hollow eyes followed me, but they did not speak. They waited for me to understand what was coming. I realized with growing dread that I wasn't just exploring the mine. I was becoming part of it, and resistance would only delay the inevitable. The mine had claimed me. By the seventh night, the mine had fully revealed its intent. The flickering light ahead now burned with an unnatural intensity, illuminating walls that seemed to pulse with life. The shadows moved independently, stretching and twisting in ways no human could manipulate, forming grotesque shapes that hinted at suffering and hunger. The whispers had become a coherent chorus, urging me forward, promising revelation, power, and release if I would only surrender. I followed the pulse, each step heavier than the last, the air thick and damp with a metallic scent that clung to my clothes and skin. The chamber expanded in ways that defied logic, tunnels folding in on themselves, creating impossible geometry. In the center of this otherworldly space, the tall, faceless figure awaited, surrounded by a swarm of pale forms, suspended in the air like ghosts, trapped in a moment of fear. I could see the faces of previous victims within the mist, their expressions twisted in eternal anguish, yet strangely calm, as if they had become one with the mine. My chest tightened as I realized the truth. The mine didn't kill. It converted. It took the living, bound them in the mist, and wove their consciousness into its endless corridors. I hesitated, heart pounding, knowing that the next step would seal my fate. The mine was patient, and it wanted me. The flickering light pulsed faster, synchronizing with a strange vibration in my chest. The mine seemed alive, reacting to my hesitation, stretching and reshaping its corridors, closing off any thought of retreat. The tall, faceless figure extended its spindly hands, and the surrounding pale forms drifted closer, forming a swirling vortex of shadows and mist. I felt the whispers embed themselves in my mind, guiding me, warning me, tempting me all at once. Every instinct screamed to resist, yet a magnetic pull drew me forward, deeper into the pulsing heart of the mine. I could see fragments of memory from past explorers. Panic, fear, resignation, and finally, surrender. The ground beneath me shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, as though the mine were breathing, alive. The light ahead was no longer just a glow. It was the mine's eye, watching me, testing me, inviting me to join the eternal presence of absorbed souls. As I took the final steps toward it, I felt my consciousness stretch, intertwining with the shadows and whispers. My fear, my doubts, myself, everything was slowly dissolving into the pulse of the mine. I realized then, with chilling clarity, that I was no longer just a visitor. I was becoming part of its legacy, and the mine had won. By the 9th night, I had fully merged with the mine's rhythm. The flickering light, now brighter and almost blinding, pulsed in sync with the whispers and the subtle vibrations in the walls. Every shadow, every pale figure, every echo of the tunnels was now a part of me, and I could feel the mine itself stretching, breathing, alive all around me. The tall, faceless figure floated closer, no longer threatening, but guiding. The pale forms swirled around, merging briefly with my own shadow, as if weaving me into their eternal presence. My mind raced, yet I felt a strange serenity, a calm that came from knowing resistance was meaningless. I could see glimpses of previous explorers, frozen in fear, now part of the endless network of consciousness within the mine. A sudden pulse of light illuminated the central chamber fully, revealing the mine's heart, a swirling vortex of shadow, fog, and faintly humanoid shapes, stretching infinitely into darkness. My identity began to dissolve, replaced by something greater, something that understood every whisper, every rhythm, every shadow in the mine. I was no longer just Elena. I was part of the mine, and the mine was eternal. Now I exist within the mine, neither fully human nor fully shadow. The tunnels are endless, yet I know every twist and turn, every hidden chamber and echoing corridor. The flickering light above is my constant, pulsing heartbeat, and the shadows are my companions, my fellow absorbed explorers, bound in eternal vigilance. When curious hikers or trespassers approach Black Rock Cove, I whisper their names softly through the tunnels, my voice carried on the wind, mingling with the natural echoes of the cliffs. Those who follow the sound step into the tunnels, drawn irresistibly into the heart of the mine. Some resist and vanish in despair. Others surrender, and their consciousness joins ours, adding to the pulse and the rhythm, the eternal presence of Black Rock Cove. The mine has no hunger, only patience. It doesn't kill, it transforms. Fear and isolation are absorbed, molded into presence, until the person becomes part of the network. The mine endures because we endure, each absorbed soul a guardian, a guide, and a witness. And if you ever wander near Black Rock Cove at night and hear whispers calling your name, do not resist, or you may find yourself forever a part of the forgotten mine. My name is David Mercer, and this happened when I was hired as a night manager at Willowbrook Inn, a remote, century-old lodge in Nova Scotia. The inn had a reputation among locals. Strange noises, fleeting shadows, and unexplained disappearances. Guests often reported feeling watched or seeing figures at the end of long, empty hallways. I thought it was exaggeration, until my first night. The inn was nestled between thick woods and foggy marshlands, a place where isolation felt almost alive. On my first night, as I patrolled the dimly lit corridors, I noticed the temperature dropping sharply and the lights flickering intermittently. A low hum resonated through the walls, like the building itself was breathing. My flashlight caught a figure at the end of the hall, a pale, shadowy silhouette that disappeared when I blinked. The guest registry told me the inn was nearly empty, yet footsteps echoed behind me, slow and deliberate. Every door I checked was locked, but the sounds persisted. I tried to dismiss it as nerves, until I entered room 6, a room no longer listed in the registry. The door creaked open, revealing furniture covered in dust, a cracked mirror, and walls scrawled with faint, almost imperceptible words. Leave or join. A chill ran down my spine. Something was waiting, and it had been waiting for me. I cautiously stepped into room 6, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The scrawled words seemed to shift slightly in the corners of my vision, as though alive, urging me to read them closer. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. I could hear whispers, soft, insistent, echoing through the room. Stay, watch, follow. On the cracked mirror, a shadow moved independently of my own reflection. I froze, staring, heart hammering. The figure became clearer. A pale woman, eyes hollow, mouth slightly open, her hands pressed against the other side of the glass as if trying to reach through. I stumbled back, tripping over a threadbare rug, but the whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent. I realized then that the inn didn't just host guests, it housed them. After death. The shadows were echoes of those who had vanished, trapped within the walls, bound to the building, feeding on the fear of anyone who dared spend the night. I had thought this job would be simple. Monitor the inn, ensure safety, and maintain order. But Willowbrook had other plans, and I was already entangled in its web. By the third night, the presence in Willowbrook Inn had grown stronger, almost palpable. The hallways were alive with whispers, doors opening and closing on their own, and shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. I could hear faint sobbing echoing through the corridors, but no guest was in sight. Each step I took seemed amplified, yet simultaneously swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed. Room 6 became the epicenter of the haunting. Every time I passed by, the door would creak open slightly, beckoning me in. I could feel a pull toward it, irresistible, like the inn itself was guiding me. On one visit, I noticed scratches on the floor, forming patterns that weren't there before. The mirror inside no longer reflected the room accurately. My reflection lagged behind, moving independently, twisting my gestures into grotesque forms. The pale woman appeared again, emerging from the mirror's surface. She whispered my name softly, beckoning me closer. Her hollow eyes seemed to hold a story of anguish, of being trapped for decades, powerless yet eternal. My chest tightened with fear. Yet a strange curiosity compelled me forward. I realized then that Willowbrook Inn didn't just host spirits. It consumed them, binding them to its walls, feeding on their isolation, fear, and despair. And I was next in line. I tried to maintain my composure, patrolling the inn with heightened vigilance. But the hauntings intensified. Doors slammed behind me, unseen footsteps followed my every move, and the whispers became coherent phrases. You belong here. Stay forever. Join us. The air in the corridors grew colder, almost biting, frosting over the edges of the windows. One night, drawn by an irresistible pull, I entered room 6 again. The furniture had shifted inexplicably, forming a circular pattern around the cracked mirror. The pale woman was there, her form more solid than before, and her eyes locked onto mine. I felt a cold hand brush my shoulder, though no one was there. Panic surged, but my body refused to move away. Then I saw the wall beside the mirror, names etched in the plaster, hundreds of them, fading in and out, glowing faintly in the dim light. I recognized some of the vanished visitors from local reports. Their essence lingered here, trapped, part of the inn's dark history. Willowbrook Inn didn't just take people, it preserved them, twisted them, and used their fear to grow stronger. And the more I resisted, the more it desired me. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet my legs moved forward. The inn was feeding on my curiosity. By the 5th night, the inn's presence became suffocating. The corridors seemed to pulse, the walls groaning softly, as if whispering secrets of the past. Each room carried its own echo of despair. Yet room 6 drew me like a magnet, an irresistible force anchoring me to its center. Every attempt to ignore it failed. The whispers clawed at my mind, the shadows twisted closer with each hesitant step. The pale woman appeared more clearly now, her movements deliberate, her hollow eyes filled with unspoken stories of torment. She gestured toward the mirror again, and for the first time, I felt the magnetic pull physically, tugging at my limbs as if I weighed nothing. I could hear faint cries beneath the whispers, muffled voices of those who had surrendered before me. I realized the inn's power was not just psychological, it was living. Every wall, floorboard, and flickering light contributed to its will, shaping reality inside its haunted halls. The building was sentient, feeding off fear, isolation, and curiosity, binding lost souls into a twisted eternity. My body moved forward almost involuntarily, toward the mirror, toward the figure. Resistance felt futile, and yet the terror in my chest grew with every step. I was no longer merely a visitor. I was a participant, and the inn was fully aware of me. I entered room 6 once more, and the atmosphere thickened immediately. The air smelled of damp wood, mildew, and a faint metallic tang that made my stomach churn. The mirror's surface shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not only my own form, but dozens of faint silhouettes behind me. Faces twisted in fear, hands reaching outward, trapped in the inn's grasp. The pale woman moved closer, her form flickering like smoke, yet solid enough to provoke a visceral fear. She whispered my name, elongated and mournful, beckoning me closer. I could feel the pull of the mirror intensifying, as if it sought to draw my very soul into its depths. Shadows swirled around my feet, thickening into small eddies of fog that wrapped around my legs, attempting to hold me. Then I noticed the inscriptions on the wall glowing faintly, the names of all who had vanished. I recognized some from old police reports, some from whispers of locals. Each name pulsed in rhythm with the faint heartbeat of the inn itself. I understood the terrifying truth. Willowbrook Inn didn't just trap or haunt, it absorbed. It preserved the essence of those who entered, weaving them into its walls, into its corridors, into its very soul. And tonight, it wanted me to join. By the 7th night, the inn's power had reached its zenith. The hallways seemed to stretch infinitely, twisting and folding in ways that defied logic. Every door I passed rattled or creaked, and shadows flickered with impossible speed, racing along the walls as if alive. The whispers became a chorus, layering over each other, repeating my name, taunting me. Stay. Surrender, join us. Room 6 called me irresistibly. As I approached, the pale woman emerged fully from the mirror, her hollow eyes now locked onto mine with an intensity that froze me in place. Her hand reached toward me, and I felt the pull of the mirror again, stronger than before, tugging at my very essence. I realized that the inn didn't just trap souls, it enticed them, promising knowledge, connection, and release, only to bind them eternally to its walls. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, shifting, pulsating in rhythm with the mirror's glow. Faces of previous victims emerged momentarily from the plaster, their expressions a mixture of terror and resignation, their mouths forming silent screams. My chest tightened as I recognized the pattern. Every soul who resisted was tortured. Every soul who surrendered was absorbed, becoming part of the inn's consciousness. I stepped closer, heart pounding, compelled by fear, curiosity, and some unexplainable force. I was no longer just a man walking the halls. I was becoming part of Willowbrook Inn. The pull of room 6 became overwhelming. As I crossed the threshold, the shadows coalesced, swirling around my legs and torso like cold, living smoke. The pale woman reached out, her hand solid yet impossibly ethereal, brushing my shoulder with an icy chill that stole my breath. The mirror pulsed brighter, reflecting not just me but the countless absorbed souls, their expressions frozen in eternal torment. The whispers intensified into coherent phrases, repeating endlessly, "Stay, surrender, become one." I felt my mind fraying at the edges, thoughts twisting under the constant assault of unseen voices. The furniture shifted subtly, forming concentric patterns around the mirror, each object vibrating in time with the whispers. I realized the inn itself was a sentient entity. Every creak of floorboard, flicker of light, and rustle of shadow a deliberate attempt to lure, manipulate, and bind. I tried to step back, but my legs moved forward regardless, drawn by some magnetic compulsion. The pale woman's hollow eyes conveyed no malice, only inevitability. Every fear, every hesitation, every ounce of will was being absorbed into the inn's consciousness, folding me into its eternal rhythm. I was caught between resistance and surrender. And as the pulsing light enveloped me, I understood fully. Willowbrook Inn doesn't release. It only collects. By the 9th night, my reality had merged completely with Willowbrook Inn. The hallways seemed infinite, stretching and folding in impossible ways. Every whisper echoed through my mind, every flicker of light synced with the pulse of the inn. The shadows no longer followed. They enveloped me, swirling like cold smoke, drawing me ever closer to room 6. The pale woman stood in the center, now solid and terrifyingly real, yet impossibly ethereal. Her hollow eyes bore into my soul as the mirror pulsed with an unrelenting rhythm, reflecting the countless absorbed guests surrounding me in spectral forms. Each face twisted in fear and resignation, silently screaming their stories, forming a living tapestry of despair and eternity. I realized the inn's true nature. It didn't simply haunt. It absorbed identities, fears, and memories, weaving them into its walls and corridors, creating a sentient entity that thrived on the souls of those who entered. Resistance was futile. Curiosity, fear, and desperation had already bound me. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet my body was no longer entirely my own. Step by step, I merged further into the inn's consciousness, becoming another ghostly thread in its eternal fabric. And in that horrifying clarity, I understood. Willowbrook Inn doesn't forget. It never releases. Now, I exist within Willowbrook Inn, no longer entirely human, yet not a mere ghost. The walls, hallways, and shadows are extensions of my consciousness, intertwined with the countless others absorbed before me. Every flicker of light, every creak, every whisper is a voice I now understand, a rhythm I now feel. When new visitors approach the inn, I whisper their names, luring them through corridors, guiding them toward room 6, where the pale woman awaits. Those who resist vanish or wander aimlessly, lost forever in the hallways. Those who surrender are absorbed, joining the eternal network of consciousness, their fear and despair feeding the inn's will. I am a guardian, a witness, and a guide within its endless corridors. My humanity is fragmented, but my awareness is sharper than ever. I see every shadow, hear every whisper, and feel every pulse of the inn. Willowbrook Inn is patient, eternal, and insatiable. And if you ever find yourself wandering its fog-laden paths at night, drawn to its lights or whispers, do not resist, or you may become part of its endless legacy. My name is Clara Hayes, and this happened the summer I took a short-term teaching position in a remote Nova Scotia town called Ravens Hollow. The town was small, isolated, and surrounded by dense, mist-covered forests. Locals were polite but tight-lipped, and I often sensed their wary glances when I asked about the town's history. They avoided certain topics, and I chalked it up to small-town secrets. Until I experienced the shadows myself. It started subtly. On my first night in the teacher's residence, I noticed faint movements at the edge of my vision. Shadows flickering along walls and ceilings where no light could reach. The air felt heavier, colder, as though the night itself pressed against my skin. I dismissed it as nerves or fatigue until a whisper, almost imperceptible, called my name. Walking the narrow streets, I saw figures out of the corner of my eye. Tall, indistinct, and always disappearing when I looked directly. Dogs barked at nothing, and windless nights carried the faint sound of distant, echoing laughter. Something was watching, always watching. The deeper I ventured into Ravens Hollow, the more the town seemed alive with a dark intelligence, a consciousness that studied, waited, and occasionally intervened. And that's when I first saw the shadows move with purpose. The second night, the shadows became bolder. As I walked back from the town center, a pair of indistinct figures emerged from the fog. They didn't move like humans. Their limbs stretched unnaturally, their heads tilting in impossible angles. Yet they seemed to study me, tracking every step. My heart pounded, and I felt a deep, instinctive dread, a sense that they knew things about me, my fears, my past, my vulnerabilities. Inside my small residence, I tried to lock doors and windows, but I could hear faint scraping noises along the walls and floorboards, as if invisible hands were exploring the house. Whispers grew louder, sometimes forming words, sometimes just hissing fragments. You cannot leave. We are everywhere. One glance out the window revealed a shadow just beyond the yard, tall and featureless, dissolving into the mist whenever I blinked. Lights flickered inside the room, casting my own shadow into shapes I didn't recognize. Elongated, distorted, almost alive. By then, I realized the shadows were not merely spirits or ghosts. They were something else. Something that could manipulate perception, bending reality around them, testing my mind, my resolve, my sanity. I was trapped in Ravens Hollow, and the town's darkness had begun its game. By the third night, the shadows of Ravens Hollow had grown more aggressive. They no longer stayed at the edges of my vision. They followed me, tracking my movements through the house, slipping along walls and ceilings with a silent, predatory grace. Every room I entered seemed subtly changed, furniture slightly shifted, floors creaking under invisible weight. The air itself carried a chill that clung to my bones, a suffocating cold that seemed to seep into my very thoughts. I began hearing whispers clearly now, insistent, probing, demanding. "You cannot leave. You belong here. Follow." The words were foreign, yet intimate, resonating with my deepest fears. On one occasion, I caught a glimpse of a shadow standing in the corner of my bedroom, its head tilting unnaturally, limbs bending in impossible ways. I froze, heart hammering, as it slowly stepped closer, dissipating into mist just before it reached me. The townspeople's wary behavior made sense. They weren't secretive out of superstition. They were hiding from the shadows themselves. Each disappearance, each whispered warning I had heard about Raven's Hollow, was connected. The shadows had claimed victims before me, drawing them into the fog, bending reality until there was no escape. And I was beginning to understand the horrifying truth. The shadows were patient, sentient, and relentless. They were waiting for me to falter. The fourth night, the shadows escalated their torment. Every time I moved, the whispering followed, sometimes in chorus, sometimes in fractured phrases. "You cannot escape. We see you. We are always near." I noticed the shadows no longer obeyed normal physics. They slipped through walls, passed beneath doors, and stretched across rooms in ways that made no sense, warping space around them. One evening, I stepped into the hallway and froze. A shadow figure moved with purpose toward me, its presence suffocating, bending the very light around it. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. My own shadow warped independently, twisting into shapes I did not recognize, some humanoid, others completely alien. I began seeing glimpses of previous victims in the mist, their forms half visible, half consumed, watching, warning, and yet powerless. The fog outside the windows seemed to pulse with life, drawing me toward it, whispering promises of release if I surrendered. Raven's Hollow was no ordinary town. It was a trap, a predator that used darkness as both camouflage and weapon, feeding on isolation, fear, and curiosity. And I was its newest target. The shadows wanted more than observation. They wanted me. By the fifth night, I felt the shadows closing in. Every corner of my residence seemed alive, each movement accompanied by subtle shifts and whispers that I could no longer ignore. Doors opened and closed without touch, and the fog outside crept along the floors, curling around my feet as if testing my resolve. The whispers had grown insistent, now speaking in sentences that chilled me to my core. "We see you. You cannot leave. We are everywhere." I tried to resist, barricading doors and windows, yet the shadows found ways to penetrate every barrier. A tall, featureless form appeared in the hallway, its limbs stretching and bending unnaturally, moving in ways that defied human motion. It paused and tilted its head, watching me, studying me as if calculating my fear. I began to feel myself changing, my thoughts twisting under constant pressure. Sleep was impossible. The shadows haunted even my dreams, creeping into my subconscious, whispering, guiding, manipulating. Each attempt to leave town ended in confusion. The roads looped back to Raven's Hollow as if the town itself was a maze, bending space to trap me. I realized I was no longer merely a visitor. I was prey, and the shadows were patient predators, waiting for me to surrender completely. The sixth night, exhaustion made me vulnerable. Every shadow in the house seemed to pulse with awareness, growing denser, moving faster. Whispers now took on a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, echoing through walls, floors, and ceilings. The featureless figure appeared inside my bedroom, stretching impossibly across the walls, head tilting in that same unnatural way. Its presence was oppressive, suffocating, and I could feel its gaze burrowing into my mind. I tried to speak, to shout, but my voice caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed to run, but the fog and shadows distorted the hallways, looping me back to the same central room over and over. Each step I took felt predestined, controlled by the darkness itself. Then I glimpsed other shapes in the mist, previous victims, frozen mid-motion, faces contorted in terror and resignation. Their presence reminded me of the inevitability of surrender, a warning and a lure at the same time. The shadows didn't just haunt, they consumed attention, energy, and identity, bending the mind until resistance was futile. I realized fully then, Raven's Hollow wasn't a town, it was a living trap. And tonight, I was the shadows' intended prey. By the seventh night, the shadows were no longer subtle. They dominated every corner of Raven's Hollow. The streets, the woods, the fog itself felt alive, moving with purpose. Each whisper was deliberate, probing the edges of my mind, testing my fears, calculating my reactions. You belong to us. You cannot escape. Surrender. The voices hissed, and I felt my will beginning to fray under the relentless pressure. As I walked back to my residence, the fog outside thickened unnaturally, twisting into shapes that resembled human figures. Shadows slithered along walls and floors, following me, weaving around each step. I realized the town was no longer just a setting, it was a predator, and I was trapped in its labyrinthine control. Inside the residence, I saw the shadows coalescing into humanoid shapes, stretching and bending in ways that defied all natural physics. They didn't need to move toward me. Their very presence reached into my mind, gnawing at my sanity. The featureless figure from previous nights now stood near the window, watching silently, patient yet menacing. I understood then the horrifying truth. Raven's Hollow had always been a trap for the curious, the isolated, the unsuspecting. And the shadows were its hunters, and I was the prey. That night, the shadows revealed their full intent. They were patient, deliberate, and intelligent. The fog and darkness acted as their hunting ground, bending reality, distorting space and time, forcing me to walk in endless loops through streets and corridors that should have been familiar. Every attempt to escape led me back to the same center, the residence, the fog, the looming, featureless figure. Inside, the shadows began to coalesce around me, thick and almost tangible. Whispers became voices, repeating my name, taunting me, recounting my fears, and revealing my secrets. My own reflection in the darkened windows seemed to move independently, distorted, hollow-eyed, matching the unnatural movements of the figures around me. I felt my sense of self slipping, my identity fraying, as if the shadows were slowly absorbing my very essence. I realized with mounting terror that Raven's Hollow wasn't merely haunted. It was alive, sentient, feeding on fear, curiosity, and isolation. The shadows weren't just observers, they were predators, bending reality to ensnare their victims. By the 8th hour, I understood my reality had become intertwined with the darkness, and the shadows were ready to claim me entirely. By the 9th night, the shadows had fully claimed Raven's Hollow. The streets, the fog, and even the trees seemed to pulse with dark awareness. Every step I took was anticipated, every breath monitored. The whispers had become a chorus, chanting my name, recounting my deepest fears, mocking my attempts to resist. You cannot leave. You belong to us. Surrender. I tried to escape, running through twisting, fog-filled streets that seemed to loop endlessly. Every turn brought me back to my residence, where the featureless figure waited, patient and unmoving, yet radiating an almost tangible menace. Shadows stretched across walls, floors, and ceilings, wrapping around my legs and arms, guiding, constraining, and overwhelming me. Inside, the fog thickened, swirling into forms that resembled previous victims, faces twisted in fear, reaching, warning, yet powerless. I realized fully that the shadows were not spirits, nor illusions. They were predators, intelligent and patient, feeding on fear, curiosity, and the despair of isolation. I was no longer a visitor in Raven's Hollow. I was part of its dark design, ensnared by the very entity that had claimed countless others. And the shadow's patience had reached its end. They were ready to claim me entirely. On the final night, the shadows surrounded me completely. The fog had thickened to an impenetrable wall, the town itself bending and twisting under their will. I could feel the featureless figure's presence in every step, every breath, every heartbeat. The whispers formed a single, overwhelming command. Surrender. Join us. Become one. I struggled, but the shadows wrapped around me like cold, living smoke. My reflection in the darkened windows no longer matched my movements. It was hollow-eyed, distorted, and yet it seemed more real than I was. The forms of previous victims merged with the mist, their faces contorted in terror, silently guiding me toward surrender. Then, as I stumbled forward, the shadows dissipated briefly, revealing the town's secret. Every building, every street, every corner was part of an intricate web of darkness, designed to trap and consume the curious, the fearful, and the isolated. Raven's Hollow didn't just haunt, it claimed, bent reality, and reshaped identity until escape was impossible. I am now a part of the town, my thoughts and fears woven into its consciousness, guiding future victims, whispering to the next lost soul drawn into the fog. Raven's Hollow is patient. It is eternal. And if you ever wander too far into the fog, it will claim you too.